Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, to this special coverage of Ukraine-Russia conflict. After months of bombing that destroyed much of Mariupol, Ukraine's military said it was ending its combat mission in the southern port city, as evacuation of the last fighters at the embattled Azovstal steel plant began Monday evening. On the other side of diplomacy, Swedish Foreign Minister on Tuesday signed the country's application to join NATO, bringing the country a step closer to the membership. Both Sweden and Finland are expected to submit the application to join the military organization NATO this week. Yet, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Swedish and Finnish diplomats should not visit his country on the upcoming trip because his government does not intend to approve their NATO applications. To this point, after 12 weeks since the beginning of this war on Ukraine, the so-called military operation, what is Putin's intention for the next weeks? And could Ukraine save the eastern part of the country, or it is to be given up? And could the possibility of Finland and Sweden to join NATO will only push the escalation forward? To answer these questions, we have from Ukraine, Mr. Andrej Babic, Associate Professor at Kiev Polytechnic Institute, and Mr. Vladimir Sullivan, political analyst from Ukraine as well, and Dr. Gurraz Sheikh, international expert from India. Gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The discussion begins right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, let me shed light over this information. A rescue operation for Ukrainian fighters from the huge Azovstal steelworks was underway on Tuesday, according to Kiev, which now considers that these men have fulfilled their mission. Russia, meanwhile, said that 265 Ukrainian soldiers from Azovstal Steel have been taken prisoners since Monday. Soldiers suffered a month of siege. They were taken into pro-Russian territory but must be returned to the Ukrainian side as part of the exchange procedures. Mr. Andrej, based on this given information so far from the eastern part of Ukraine, the residents over there are trying to join Russia. On the other hand, Ukraine's president is saying that this is a fake referendum. So what is close to be true in your mind?
Well, I think we can divide this question into several parts. Of course, if we talk about the southern occupation zone, like Oblast in Kherson, near the biggest city, which occupied under Russian troops, they're trying to make such a referendum, but it's not easy to realize this because maybe 50% of population there, they were like displaced person. They leave the district, and those who are there, they not only they don't want to support the Russian military forces, and that's why this referendum is quite difficult for them. As we talk about eastern Ukraine, there are a lot of battlefield actions there, so we not even talk about some political actions because every actions in battlefield just going on, and the situation is quite not as easy as we can say there. But of course, the Russian Federation's Kremlin, they want to legalize those parts that under occupations today, because their aim, maybe main goal, is to demonstrate their own population that they gain some success in this so-called military operation. Of course, we can see that there was not really so successful as they want. They plan to be in February this year. That's why I think that the question of referendum, of course, it will rise, but a little bit sooner when the main actions on the battlefield will end.
Quite understood. Mr. Gurlaz, Russia's picture has now changed in the whole world and precisely in Europe. So, as an international expert, how can you consider this military operation so far? And what is Putin's next step?
See, as far as the military operations are going on, they do not look very enthusiastic when it comes to Russia, because Ukraine is a very small country in comparison to Russia, and the Russian forces are not performing good at all at any point. You see, they were not able to capture Kyiv, and they are also having losses even in the east. So they are not performing well, and this is not painting Russia in a good picture. And that's the reason you will see a dominoes effect. There is something called as exhaustion by war. And it looks like Russia has got exhausted in these 2 months of war, because there is a lot of help to Ukraine from the Western countries and especially from the United States. So Russia is looking exhausted both militarily as well as economically. And the dominoes effect of that you are seeing. You are seeing Sweden and Finland, who has maintained neutrality throughout the Cold War, but now they are recalculating their stakes and they are open to join, and they have actually applied to join NATO. But the things won't stop here, because if Russian forces behave shows the same type of outcome, then you will also find Georgia. You may also find Moldova. And you may even find Austria.
Quite understood. We will come to this point, Mr. Gulraz. We will come to this point. Mr. Vladimir, how can you read Putin's speech in his Russians' Victory Day? He said that this year's parade represents another victory for our nation and our ancestors. In other words, USSR. In your analysis, is he looking to bring back the Soviet Union, or this is just words of celebration?
Well, thanks for having me. At first, Putin's speech during Victory Day at the Red Square was insignificant and faced with critics from even pro-Russian forces inside Russia, so-called patriotic ones, because he didn't proclaim neither state of war towards Ukraine or even mobilization. And there is a fierce discussion inside pro-Kremlin and so-called pro-patriotic forces inside Russia that without proclaiming mobilization, Russia cannot win this war, because it is quite exhausted during the battlefield in Donbass, and we are witnessing that Russia doesn't have enough strength to achieve its goals, since it is about more than 80 days of heavy fighting with Ukraine. So I think that inside Kremlin there is no clear understanding what they have to achieve, and the issue of occupation of southern parts of Ukraine is quite of element of blackmail of Ukraine, and in combination with missile attacks and destroying Ukrainian economy, they try to exchange this pressure on Ukraine and ongoing occupation of southern parts of Ukraine. And sooner or later, the Kremlin will try to exchange these achievements towards recognition by of autonomy.
Quite understood, Mr. Vladimir. Mr. Andrej, just in the same point, do you think that the intention of Putin is to bring back the Soviet Union, or this is just words to push fear in his competitors, I mean?
Of course, back into Soviet Union and to stretch the geopolitical power of Russia Federation, economic power, to be the Kremlin, the center of those geopolitical type was always a dream of Vladimir Putin. But I think that he can be quite realistic now, and those speech that we heard on the 9th of May, I think prove that he just today he understood that everything goes wrong, that his plan A, so-called plan A, where He wants to go into Kiev during 4 days and to make a pro-Russian government here. This plan doesn't work, and that's why he needs to make some just easy, a little bit easy plan minimum or plan B to occupy eastern part, southern parts of Ukraine. And of course, he once more, he will demonstrate the public Russian citizens, his voters, that this is an attempt to reduce Soviet Union. And that's why we see such meetings like ODKB yesterday, military union of post-Soviet countries. But even there, Putin didn't get those support from leaders of post-Soviet countries. Maybe just President Lukashenko from Belarus, his traditional supporter for the last time. But it's not easy for him to renew Soviet Union as well.
Perfect. All right, moving on now to the second point. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said his country will not back down on NATO membership for Sweden and Finland after the two countries formalized their bids to join the alliance.
Pazartesi günü Türkiye'ye gelecekler.
They say they will come to Turkey on Monday. Will they come to try to convince us? Sorry, but they shouldn't bother. We won't say yes to joining the security organization NATO for those who apply sanctions against Turkey.
Yaptırım uygulayanların.
Coming back to you, Mr. Andrej, how can you consider this move from Finland and Sweden? Is this decision comes to the scene only when Russia launched its military operation over Ukraine, or it was an already plan made before that?
I think that military operation was the main point where these northern European countries made such a decision. We could see before that some propaganda actions on Russia television where they demonstrate they want to attack some territories in the Baltic Sea near the border of Finland or Sweden. And of course, it's normal reactions of political establishment of these countries, of even voters there to join NATO. Those countries were neutral, maybe if you talk about Sweden, for 200 years. If you talk about Finland, they became neutral after invasion of Soviet Union after the World War II. But they made such a decision because they know that Russia is still an aggressive country, and it proved this aggression during Ukraine invasion in February. That's why it's quite realistic decision for them. But it's interesting that reactions to Vladimir Putin was quite calm. Just a few days ago, that he said that it's not a problem of joining of NATO of these countries.
Understood. Mr. Guraz, don't you think that there is a sort of two-phase challenge between the NATO and EU leaders? In other words, some of them are trying to escalate the war, such as UK, Germany, whom they keep calling all the countries to join the alliance. And on the other hand, probably France and Turkey are looking forward to bring the peaceful resolution close to the table. And this is why Turkey is objecting.
Definitely, countries which are far away, like of that of Great Britain, they are trying to escalate. And if the things escalate, they have long-term goals vis-a-vis Russia, so they will be fulfilling that. But other countries who have lots of stakes with Russia, example that of Germany, who is very, very much dependent on Russian energy, want the de-escalation of the things. As far as Turkey is concerned, it's a very interesting country in this context because they are having objection on Sweden and Finland on account of some sympathy vis-a-vis PKK sections, those militant outfits who want separate land, separate Kurdistan from Turkey. And Turkey considers them as terror outfits. But definitely there is some sympathy for those outfits there in some political circles of Finland and Sweden. And Turkey want to renegotiate with these countries on these issues. Plus, there is also some restriction on Turkish arm industry in these countries. So definitely they will renegotiate on those terms as well. And we should not forget that in 2019, when just before the 70th celebration of 70th anniversary of NATO in London, London, Turkish president tried his level best to raise the issue of PKK, and he was wanting that all the NATO countries should regard PKK and accept them as a terror outfit. But that time Turkey failed. But right now the situation is something different, because the NATO needs Turkey very much vis-a-vis Russia because of its geopolitical location. So I think there will be some kind of a rapprochement and some kind of talks between the two parties, and things will be mellowed down. And so very soon you will find, maybe between 4 to 8 months, you may find these two countries, Sweden and Finland, in the fold of NATO. Because don't forget one thing, that both Finland and Sweden check in all the boxes which are required to join NATO. Plus, they bring so much on the table when it comes to the security aspect of Northern Europe, and not only Northern Europe, but even in the Baltic area. They will bring so much on table.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gulraz. Mr. Vladimir, way of joining NATO membership. The French President Emmanuel Macron said it will take decades for Ukraine to be accepted into the European Union. How can you consider this contradiction? EU is trying to help Ukraine. At the same time, they are refusing Ukraine to be joined. This refusal based on what?
Well, on my purpose, the main issue is security ones. Because obviously Ukraine cannot become a EU member state when the war will go on. So at first we should keep our borders under our control, and there should be no territorial disputes with Russia. And I think that only under such condition Ukraine may become EU member state. But until now we don't know how long it will take for Ukraine to
stand back on feet
that are occupied by Russia, and Crimea is on the table. So I think that the main issue, of course, is security ones, but that doesn't contradict with the aim and the Ukrainian desire of key official Kiev to have such a perspective, and this perspective should be negotiated on a high level between Western leaders. So we as Ukrainians may understand that there is a clear goal and clear perspective for Ukraine to become someday a EU member state, and such statements that were made by Emmanuel Macron are seen as a chance to make some push towards Russian position, and it's obviously unpleasant for us, for Ukrainians.
Thank you, Mr. Vladimir. Based on your words, Mr. Andrej, Mr. Vladimir is saying that diplomacy probably is going to be the only solution, but the question raised, why diplomacy failed before? Why didn't succeed?
And some fear about Ukrainian integration into NATO, because European countries just feared Russia. And we saw those events earlier in 2008 in Bucharest summit in NATO. Germany and France just blocked Ukrainian integration to get the action plan to NATO, and not only Ukraine, and Georgia was in such a situation. Even a few months later, Georgia just getting a Russian invasion there. That's why I think that not only depends on Ukrainian diplomacy, it depends on diplomacy of European Union, of European countries. And even now, when Ukraine suffers such an occupation, such an aggressive actions from Russian Federation, not all European countries are going to just support Ukraine in those Euro integrations strategy. But I want to add that the NATO direction is signed in Ukrainian constitution, so this is one of the main parts there. And our president and our government and all political parties today in Ukraine, such as just voters, citizens, they're not ready to go to another side. They don't want to join Russia. They want to join European Union and NATO as well.
Straight to the point, yes.
Yeah.
That's the main idea, joining the EU. Bulgarian Prime Minister Kirill Peskov said that his country will try to get a 2-year exemption from the European ban on Russian oil to set up a new infrastructure during talks with Dutch counterpart Mark Rutte, and emphasized that his country is not ready to take potential risk.
Bulgaria has shown that it doesn't bend under pressure from a foreign state. We have shown that we have the will to remain strong with our European partners. But when it comes to oil right now, we are just not in a position to take that potential risk.
And our countries are working together closely and constructively, also to keep Bulgaria safe against the Russian threats. You have friends all over Europe. You are not alone. And we know that you will help us if that is necessary.
Mr. Vladimir, in the same line of thoughts, as a Ukrainian, will you accept the salvation of Ukraine on the collapse of other nations?
Well, we understand that Europe was not prepared for energy ban, and some states are very dependent on Russian oil and gas supplies. So there is an interest for Ukraine to keep European economy reliable and compatible, so they could provide additional support for Ukraine, because this undermining of European societies and capabilities of government to fulfill their what they have to do to their own societies is a strategy of Kremlin to undermine European capability to help Ukraine and to defend itself. But at the same time, there is an issue: how long should this war provide until Europeans will pay billions of euro per day for Russian energy supplies?
Understood.
At the beginning of the war, they paid more than 40 billion euro for Russian gas and oil, and this money are spent for shelling of Ukrainian cities, facilities, and destruction of Ukrainian economy. And it's quite
understood.
State in development.
Thank you, Mr. Vladimir. Mr. Gorlaz, you previously, one of my show guests, Mr. Hussein Askar, who is a member of the Road and the Belt Initiative in Sweden, he told me that this policy of sanctions is a suicidal policy that will hurt, that will harm all the European countries more than Russia itself. Do you agree with that?
Yes, to an extent, I agree with him. That the policies of sanction doesn't work well, and the biggest drawback of that is can be turning Russia, the mighty Russia, into a rogue state like North Korea. And can Europe and world in general afford a rogue Russia? You should ask this question to everybody. So these sanctions are not going to work like that. What will work is the diplomacy, and it doesn't look like that diplomacy has been given full chance by both the sides. So diplomacy should work, but these sanctions may turn Russia into a rogue state, and if Russia suffers a lot, it can take wrong decisions. And mind one thing, when big nations take it on their own survival, then they may take dangerous decisions, and dangerous decisions may include nukes. That is a big threat to the world order and world peace.
Perfectly understood. Mr. Andrej, Hungary was the first country that responded to Putin's call for pay to ruble. Yet the sanctions imposed on Russia destroyed the basis of its economy. And now Bulgaria is threatening not to support the new set of sanctions. So, as a European, do you think that this sanctions policy is really going to bring a way out for Ukraine by sacrificing other countries? If so, will you accept this?
Of course, we are like Europeans and Ukrainians. We are not always satisfied with the dynamics of the sanctions of those packages that realized today, and we see that the sixth package, it's just stopped a little bit due to these countries like Bulgaria and Hungary and Slovakia, so on, because they are not ready so far and so fast to transform the energy system into another delivery from gas, from oil, and so on. We've heard about just some projects from the United States to bring American gas to Bulgaria. But of course, I quite understand the actions of their government. They see their population can suffer from this transformation. But they must understand another part of the question. The European security today is under attack. So if we put in the middle the question of what is better, to get some economical problems or get some security threat, I think that the answer to these questions is quite logical. It's better to make any diversifications of their dependence from Russia in energy politics, and the next step they should realize that they must develop like their security forces and their energy system as well.
Perfectly understood, well raised points. The last point to be discussed briefly, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTU leaders met in Moscow on Monday for the first time since 2019 amid the Ukraine crisis. The summit was attended by the leaders of all 6 member states, including Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. The meeting was dedicated to the 30th anniversary of signing of the Collective Security Treaty and the 20th anniversary of the creation of the organization itself.
Russia has no problem with Finland and Sweden just because they decide to join NATO. Their application for NATO membership will not pose a direct threat to Russia, while Russia will certainly react if there is an expansion of military infrastructures on the territories of these countries. How exactly does Russia respond will depend on what kind of threat is posed to Russia.
Mr. Vladimir, coming back to you briefly, please, do you think and do you still think that Russia will come over all Ukraine again, or the main focus now will be only on the eastern part only?
I think that Russia is exhausted enough, and it doesn't have forces to provide additional offensives against Odessa port, for example, or continue its advance against Kryvyi Rih to the north from its occupied territories of Kherson Oblast. Also, I think until now Russia doesn't have enough strength to repeat its invasion on the northern part of Ukraine. So the main goal is to annex 2 oblasts of Ukraine, Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast. But due to maneuverous defense of Ukrainian forces, Russia exhausts its battle tactic groups. Still, it have enough strength to provide this.
Perfectly understood. Perfectly understood. Now, Mr. Andrej, do you agree with what Mr. Vladimir is saying? Is that Russia is focusing on the Donbas region only?
Well, I think that they will continue to make their aggression against Ukraine in all forms they can just provide. Of course, the main focus today is Donbas region, but maybe in the nearest future, we'll see the scenario of such a so-called hybrid war, like they met it in 2014, where they really exhausted on a battlefield, but they can make some actions on economic, on informational sphere, not only opposite to Ukraine, but opposite to the collective Western countries, opposite to the NATO, of course. That's why it's the nature of the Russian Federation. So they always like an aggressive entity, the state that want to make some actions against other countries to realize their geopolitical influence upon other countries. This way they will never stop. But I think that it's a problem today to stop there using diplomacy and maybe military actions of other countries. That's why maybe next month we'll see some negotiations between Ukraine, Western countries, and Russian Federation.
Understood, Mr. Andrej. Mr. Gurraz, the floor is yours to put an end for this show. 1 minute left, so briefly, what is your expectation for the next week?
See, we are standing on the hinge point of history. And why I am saying that this is a hinge point of history, because throughout the Cold War era, we saw those countries like Finland and Sweden, they were neutral, but now they have started recalculating their move, because it looks like with the performance of Russian forces there in Ukraine, that Russia is on the verge of war exhaustion. And right now it is not exhausted, but it is on the verge of exhaustion. And once it got exhausted, then the floodgates of Europe the floodgates of NATO will open, and those floodgates will not only include Sweden and Finland, but also Georgia, as well as other countries, maybe even Austria or Moldova. So Putin was trying to exclude Ukraine from joining NATO, but he may end up with several more countries on his border who have joined NATO. So that is the reason I am saying that we are on the hinge point of history.
Perfectly understood. To this point, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Mr. Gurraz, Mr. Andrej, and Mr. Vladimir from Ukraine, thank you so much for joining us in this debate. With this, we reach the end of the special coverage for today. Thank you so much for being with us on L24 News with me. I'm Abdulrahim Kashur. Bye for now.